Floor is yours, Dan.
Sorry, I couldn't find my microphone. It was buried under the pile. Thanks a lot for having me and inviting me to talk about some stuff that we've been doing over the years. I've crammed way too much in here, so Emily, if you need to cut me off, feel free to do so at any point. And apparently, my slides are also auto advancing, which is incredibly annoying. And I'll try to see if I can do away with that right as we get started. But I thought it might be kind of nice just to. Um, let folks know some of what we've been up to over the last few years, and then uh, take a little bit of a closer look at some of the stuff we've been doing specifically in the Delaware. If I can, oh, that wasn't the button. That's the button. All right, cool. That wasn't embarrassing at all. So as Emily said, I'm Dan. I'm up at SUNY Oneonta. I'm at the Biological Field Station in Cooperstown and on the main campus. And I would like to talk about one of the things that excites me most in the world today, and that it is small silvery fish that run back and forth between the ocean and freshwater river systems like the Delaware. So for those who have not met, I'm rather obsessed with the suite of fish that move back and forth between the ocean and fresh water, collectively known as diadromous fishes or sea-run fishes. I'm particularly interested in things like American shad, alewife, and blueback herring. The latter two you may have heard referred to collectively as river herring. But I get really excited about things like American eels and sturgeons and striped bass and all those things that are maybe a little more commonly studied, at least in the lower Delaware River. I get really excited when I start to think about these things far up in the Delaware, especially as I'm on the divide of the Delaware River and the Susquehanna River watersheds. And one of those rivers has a lot of migratory fish and the other doesn't. And I'll let you be the guesser for that. I'm going to give you a quick background on the life history of these organisms in case you're not familiar with sea-run fish. So this diagram is for river herring, but it holds true for this whole group of fish that spend the most of their life in the ocean. So they're hatched in fresh water. At some point, they move downstream to the ocean. For shads and river herrings, this is usually in their first fall, and they'll lose competency to regulate ions in fresh water even at some point. So they have to go back out to the ocean. There, they feed and grow in coastal waters. They make some, we think, seasonal migrations back and forth along the coast and kind of hang out together before they all split back up and head back into the rivers from which they came. So
Hey
that's kind
Dan,
of yes.
sorry, your slides aren't advancing if you're actually moving them. We're
Oh,
still on
that's
your title
why.
slide.
Yeah, I bet it's because I shared the app. Thanks, Jan. So let's try that again. Oh my goodness, dude. We'll go ahead and do this one instead. And can you see an internet browser now?
Not yet. There it is.
Fantastic. All right.
Thanks, sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, thank you. So uh, these critters obviously rely on connections between freshwater and saltwater. Historically, super important, massive prey base for coastal and estuarine and freshwater fishes as well. They provide some pretty important services in terms of exchanging nutrients between freshwater and marine ecosystems, bringing marine nutrients into these systems through death and stuff like that that happens while they're spawning, but also exporting nutrients as they grow as juveniles. And many of these fish return multiple times throughout the course of their life. And can kind of work as conveyor belts in that way. Culturally and economically, all three of these species are hugely important along the entire East Coast, particularly within the Delaware River system. They would have been the basis for not so modern economies, but through the time of you know both from Native American peoples, but then also from colonization to about the time that those stocks collapsed, which looked something like this. So this graph is showing American shad and river herring landings over the course of about the last half to three quarters of a century, and you can see that landings were high back in the 1950s and 60s, and then declined precipitously thereafter, especially as we moved into the late 1990s and early 2000s. If you put this graph on a corresponding graph of fisheries landings that went back to the 1800s, this would all look like a flat line at very low levels because those landings were even much higher. We just don't have a good way to standardize them against our modern landings, and so we're not really able to use those in modern benchmark stock assessments. A lot of efforts underway to restore these species. It's a little bit of a odd topic to be talking about that in the Delaware River and picturing a dam, but everywhere else in the entire East Coast, this is one of the primary threats to restoration that we face. But this is what, in my opinion, has made American shad, especially, really fun to study in the Delaware River because this is large undammed system. So you got your primary threats now continuing to restoration. Most systems are dams. And others are fishing, and 1 in 3 cases here on the shore are mullets, not striped mullets, bad haircuts. And so we're going to take a look at how we can examine some of those things through just a couple case examples. I wanted to share one very large scale example with you, and then a small scale example from the Delaware River, or fine scale example from the Delaware River, and show you how we're starting to put some of those pieces together with the graduate students and collaborators around the coast. So this example is from Erin Gilligan-Lunda. She, for her thesis, participated in the ASMFC 2020 Benchmark American Shad Stock Assessment. And our charge was to model American shad growth along the coast. She also was interested in relating shad growth to sea surface temperature, which has been a common theme in the fishing community, especially in lower Delaware. But for those of us who fish for shad in the upper Delaware, has also been a curiosity. And then she actually was able to make some projections about what we might think will happen in the future. So there's a map here just showing a bunch of different rivers that she had data from. Again, this is all through ASMFC, the state agencies who collaborate with that. A massive effort, some 100,000 odd fish that went into this study. And I'm going to rapid fire through a few graphs of things that she found. Again, kind of set the stage. So the first thing she did was she went out and she made growth curves. And if you're not familiar with fisheries stock assessment, the growth curve often forms the backbone of stock assessments because it tells us how fast fish grow, how large they get, and also can give us an idea of their mortality rates. So this graph showing age of the fish on the x-axis, their size and fork length on the y-axis. And if you're not inclined to think about the size of fish in millimeters, you can just divide those hundreds by 4 and get back to inches. So you think 16 to 25 inches is kind of a big top end for American shad. The Delaware River is in the mix here as one of these. And then we can take all of those data and do really cool things like line them against latitude. And now the Delaware is about smack in the middle of this graph along the x-axis. So now you've got latitude on the x-axis going from south, Florida, to north, Maine. And on the y-axis, you have different life history parameters. They're pieces of those growth curves that I was showing you before. The one in the top left, that L infinity, is the theoretical maximum size of fish in a given river system. And you can see that as you move further north, there's an increase, at least to a point, maybe a leveling off after that. This jives pretty well with some of the research that was done back in the 1970s that initially found some of these latitudinal climbs. But you can also see now in the bottom right that we're able to take those relationships and extend them to natural mortality, or M. And we suspect also that those fish in the northern end of the range have lower annual mortality rates, which jives with there being some operis in the south. And Aaron was able to associate those variables, those parameters, with the lifetime sea surface temperature experienced by fish collected in different years. And so again, graphs set up the same way, but now we've got sea surface temperature on the x-axis here. And you can see that as temperature has increased over the last 30 or 40 years, that L infinity thing in the top left has gotten smaller. That means our shad are shrinking. Nobody's a big fan of that, but it's something that's been pretty commonly reported anecdotally. I know it's been a big deal in the lower Delaware and in the Bay fishery in recent years that we've been talking about a lot as a community. Likewise, again, just to steal you straight down to that bottom right-hand corner, you see that based on their life history, we suspect this means that their mortality rates have also been increasing, right, as related to sea surface temperature. And there's a whole pile of analysis that goes into this, that, testing it against just a year effect or other factors. And this is the one that kind of came out as the strongest predictor of the fish's size and their mortality rates. And the really cool thing is now once you have sea surface temperatures and you've got these kinds of relationships, now you can make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. So this graph is showing year. We're back to year on the x-axis now, and we're making predictions about how we think things might change moving forward. Given those relationships and given 100-year climate projections from the Northeast continental shelf, large marine ecosystem, we can project the growth of the fish and their mortality rates out into the future. The different shades of gray here are just different climate change scenarios that you might or might not be familiar with. It's not really that important because we're already accelerating beyond both of them. But the main gist here is that at a coast-wide level, we anticipate that we're going to continue to see some decrease to a leveling off of that maximum size, as well as a continued increase to a point of their natural mortality rate. And that's just natural mortality. That's not fishing mortality, right? And so we need to think about those kinds of things as we're trying to manage fish stocks or restore them, and realizing none of these stocks necessarily exist in isolation from any of the others. So that's really big picture stuff that we've been working on now for a few years. Matt Best just wrapped up his thesis a couple of years ago here as well. You might have run into him down at Riverkeeper if you're involved with the Hudson system at all. And his thesis was a deeper dive into the Delaware River itself. So we worked really closely in this case with Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, New York DEC, collaborators from USGS, et cetera. And the idea here was we wanted to start to get inside of one river system and check out how much variability there are in some of the life history traits of this species. So if you're not familiar with American shad, one of the coolest things about them is that in the southern end of their range in Florida, they're born, they go out to the ocean, and then after 5 or 6 years, they come back and they spawn like crazy until they die. And they stay in the rivers until they expire. They're just like a West Coast salmon in that regard. But if you come up to where I am in New York or Maine, those fish will go back to the ocean several times in a row and keep spawning and spawning and spawning. Over the course of their lifetimes, they actually achieve pretty similar reproductive output and fitness. They're just two different strategies for getting to the same endpoint. This all goes along with those latitudinal gradients I was showing you before from the stock assessment. And the Delaware River is about smack dab in the middle of all of that. So if you are fortunate enough to have spent much time on the Delaware River in June, you may have been unfortunate enough to see a lot of dead American shad on the side of the river. And there's we suspect a mix of fish that spawn once and die, and other fish that spawn many times throughout their lives in the Delaware River. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did a study a number of years back now, I think 8 or 10 years ago, starting to try to get at this. And in conversations with them, we talked more and more about it. And we thought, wouldn't this be a neat thing to poke at, especially as this system does not have dams in it, and all of the other ones north or south do. And so it could give us a really nice perspective on what we should expect in the absence of dams and how that might translate into management and restoration of this species elsewhere. So Matt was looking at both live and dead spawners. He was recording how far upstream they were collected, all the way up to 500 plus kilometers upstream, which in and of itself was really nice to be able to note. And he was examining differences in their size structure, sex ratios, their growth trajectories, and their spawning histories, how many times they returned from the ocean, all along this river kilometer gradient from Smithfield Beach, where that little A is, and that's where most of the stock assessment data come from, all the way up to about 20 minutes from my house where the eye is, and that's in Hancock in the East Branch of Delaware River. And we know for a fact that fish are moving past that, both in the East and West Branch in recent years, partly because of some of the water withdrawal changes that have happened in the last couple of years. But fish are moving historically into the East Branch, and in recent years, also into the West Branch of the Delaware. So what did Matt find? Matt found that as you go further upriver, you tend to see smaller and smaller females who are spawning in the river. So all these graphs will be set up more or less the same way, with river kilometer on the x-axis and then something else on the y-axis. It might have a panel for males and females or live and dead fish, depending on what differences were statistically significant. So when it comes to size structure, the only things that were statistically significant were the distance upriver and the sex of the fish. Females are bigger than males. We know that about American shad, though. If we look at the age structure, we see a similar trend in terms of females generally being slightly older than males by the time they come back to the Delaware. We also saw that the average age of fish increased the further upstream you caught them. So we were catching older, larger females way upriver in the Delaware than we were further down at Milford Beach, Pennsylvania, or Smithfield Beach, Pennsylvania. This was really interesting to me. We looked at the proportion of repeat spawners, or if you're into math, it's the probability that a fish was a repeat spawner. And we found out that not only was the river kilometer component important, but there are also statistically significant differences between males and females, and fish that were collected alive were dead. And so for live fish, generally there were more repeat spawning females than males, but nothing else was that variable. For the dead fish, we found that fish that spawned much further up, 500 kilometers into the system, they had a lower probability of being repeat spawners. That is, they were virgin spawning fish. It was their first time up in the river. And they came in, they spawned, and they died, and then we collected them before a black bear could eat them. Now, given that those fish repeat spawned, the number of times they did so followed a really different trend. For the dead fish, there were fewer fish with many, many repeat spawning marks far upstream. That makes sense. Most of those were virgin spawners. But for the live fish, those that were collected far upstream had more spawning experiences. They repeat spawned more times. This is really counterintuitive. This means they went 500 kilometers upriver, then all the way back out to the ocean more frequently than the same fish that were collected alive downstream. I think part of that's probably because we were catching live fish downstream that would have come upstream and died, but it certainly can't explain all of that variability. So this is really interesting and really important for thinking about fish that go above dams and have to come back downstream through them in other systems. And then finally, we found, of course, the females get larger than the males, but we found that the fish that go farther up into the system at river kilometer 533, where they were collected, those fish don't grow quite as fast as the fish that we collected further down in the river that spawned down in Milford Beach, for example. And this is, again, kind of really interesting. So what the takeaway here is, it looks like we have again, these kind of two groups, the fish that run all the way upriver and die, and they're little and they don't repeat spawn much. But then in our repeat spawning fish, it looks like the fish that move way upriver, they grow slower, they reach smaller maximum sizes overall, and probably live a little bit longer than those fish that live and spawn lower down in the system. And so now one of the things that we really like to do with us all is pack it all back together. And this is really kind of where I come into play with the grad students. And this is my realm of just computer-based modeling. And so we've developed now some larger synthetic models for American shad, alewife, and blueback herring, somewhere around 500 or 600 different populations that you can model, just sort of canned functions in an open source R package. This is out there on the internet. It's free to use. Anybody can download it. It's being the technical review for it's underway at Journal of Open Source Software right now. This incorporates data from ASMFC benchmark stock assessments, our previous studies, and really anything that's verifiably useful. We've really tried to standardize this within the software package to rely as exclusively as we can on stock assessment data so that these tools match with our coast-wide stock assessment efforts. This means attending a lot of meetings and doing a lot of math, but some of us think that's fun. Not the meetings, the math. So this is just one example of the kinds of data that go into these things. Those growth curves look really familiar because both Matt and Aaron worked on those. This is showing growth curves for blueback herring in 90, 70 or 90 some odd rivers around the East Coast. This is only for males. The female one is another one of these. And we've got them for otoliths and scales and all kinds of other things. These are really, really turning into big, powerful data sets that we can use to make projection models, basically, to model populations. And you guessed it, the Delaware River has one of these for each of those species. Some really big picture stuff that we've been working on. This is in review right now. This is a paper by Sean Steiter, his postdoc from UMaine. He's now a spatial biologist with Penobscot Nation up in Maine, working with them. And this is a map of what we think is historic blueback herring and alewife habitat, showing numbers of dams downstream of those habitat units in the colors. So yellow is not very many dams, 0 to 2. You see the entire Delaware, for the most part, is yellow with some orange mixed in, sprinkled in there. But then you get up into some of our southern New England systems, and those are really heavily dammed. Talking about 24 dams in some of those systems that these fish need to get past in order to complete their life cycle and reproduce. I'm going to throw these numbers up here. I'm not going to really go through them. Folks will have them. Talks recorded. You're welcome to spend some time with them, and they'll be out in a separate paper relatively soon here, I anticipate. But just kind of wanted to impress upon you the level of habitat loss that's happened in other systems. Again, we're really fortunate in the Delaware that it's not nearly as dire. That's not to say there's no habitat loss going on, right? We're talking about main stem dams here, really, and for alewife, we're talking about minimally 65% of their habitat that's been lost in these coastal systems. For blueback herring, slightly less, partly because there are larger free-flowing systems that they make use of in the South Atlantic, but still pretty staggering numbers when we think about upwards of 90% habitat loss for either of these species, just from one source, right? Their dams. This is pollution, being remediated, fishing being closed down in many cases, and this is really kind of one of the big remaining problems in those systems. To give you an idea of what we can do with that, we're now making coast-wide alewife and blueback herring and shad population estimates. Again, these are all driven by stock assessment data, so we feel pretty good about them. We're finding out that they're really useful for rebuilding historical situations in different rivers where dams have been removed. But I just kind of wanted to show this figure to impress upon you the magnitude of what we're talking about in terms of numbers of fish. These are silver little things that come into the Delaware as fish food. When they die, they're providing nutrient subsidies to the more nutrient deprived freshwater portions. They're removing some of those nutrients as they make these mass out migrations. And as we start to include more and more habitat around the coast, these coast-wide populations estimates, we're up in like the billion spawners territory. So it's just staggering numbers of fish. This is really what gets me excited about these species is that potential and that possibility. So I kind of want to close this up just thinking about future interests. It's something that I'm always knocking on the door about. But when it comes to systems like the Delaware, I'm super interested in diadermy across a suite of species. These sea run fishes, not just the herrings. We work pretty closely with folks on things like eels, stripers, some sturgeons, and different river systems. I'm in the Delaware specifically. I'm incredibly interested in migration extent and distribution. We've already found that the fish move up further than our resource management agencies were really, commonly aware of. I think everybody knew they were around. I don't think folks really appreciated how far up American shad, for example, get into the East Branch of the Delaware River and tributaries, trout streams. And I think, it's an important component of what we do that is often overlooked in favor of things. Not maybe not in favor of things, but because we have such a cold water focus on our fisheries conservation and management in the Delaware, this is a really critical, important component of even those cold water fisheries, right? These things all evolve together and to stay in the same place. So this is kind of where I'm pointing my study laser at next is thinking about how we could quantify extents and distributions. I want to get out and start counting dead fish. I'd really love to see if that could be a nice stock assessment tool to be able to get at those kinds of abundance indices, just based on the number of dead fish that are washing up on the side of the river. And it's a lot more convenient to do that than to try to set a gill net over the top of Skinner's Falls or try to get an electrofishing boat through the gap. Like it's a tough place to sample if you've not spent a lot of time out there trying to collect fish. Population dynamics generically, I'm super interested in. We've been doing a lot of work here in the Susquehanna on eels. I'd love to be able to do some comparative work in the Delaware if there's opportunity or interest, or even just be able to share those data with people. And then the other thing that's really got my brain going wild in the Delaware right now is the idea of seasonality and how that might be shifting for some of these species, and whether or not that's contributing to things we see like giant runs of gizzard shad way up far in the river. So I've probably talked for way too long with that. I should acknowledge people. With that, I'll acknowledge a bunch of folks. That these specifically are groups and individuals who've contributed to American shad and river herring efforts. There's about 30 graduate students who should probably be on this list as well. I guess they're all summed up with the College at Oneonta logo. And if there's time left, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Plenty of time for questions, if anybody has any. Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Dan. This was a great presentation, so I'm going to stop recording right now.